Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Peachy from your WCA biology class, and today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a web tutorial for you on the comparative reproductive systems of different animals. Okay, so we're doing this as a supplement to what we did in class today because we did not have time to get through everything, and I just wanted to make sure that we have all of the comparative anatomy covered when it comes to reproduction. Now, some of the stuff we talked about in class, which I will briefly kind of go through with you right now, is some vocabulary terms. So here's one of the ones that I used here. We have types of reproduction that can occur in animals is sexual or asexual reproduction, or some animals can do both. Just remember that always, sexual reproduction is preferred because of the ability to increase genetic diversity. And it's preferred to have genetic diversity because what that does is it actually enhances the species' ability to survive or avoid extinction, right? Because if you have some sort of selection pressure, such as disease, that comes along, if every animal has the same genetics, then they're all going to be equally susceptible to that disease. Okay? And if there's genetic diversity, that means that some may be susceptible and some may not be, so the species will then go on and survive. The next column says males and females or hermaphrodites. So a male and female, that just means an animal who that has both male and female representatives within that particular species. Hermaphroditic animals will have both male and female parts. They're going to have both the ability to produce egg and sperm. And then we have something where fertilization can take place internally, or it can take place externally. And probably the most confusing words on here are ovoparity, ovoviviparity, or viviparity. So oviparity means that the animal lays an egg. That egg can be fertilized already, or it can be fertilized externally. However, all of the gestation, incubation, takes place outside of the mother's body. Okay? Examples would be things like the frog, for example, does oviparity. Ovoviviparity means that there's an egg inside the mother's body which is fertilized, but the animal is incubating in the egg and it's not relying upon the mother's body systems to provide nutrients. It gets all of its nutrients from the yolk in the egg. And then when the animal has its baby, that baby actually looks like a live birth, but it's actually hatching from an egg inside and making its way out of the mother's body. That's different from viviparity, where the animal has an embryo that is attached to a placenta that is actually linked to the mother's blood supply. And so the mother's nutrients are shared with the nutrients of her baby in utero. And then the baby is born live. So some animals, like the horn shark, for example, they actually are ovoviviparous animals. They have eggs internally, and then the baby seems to be born, it is born alive. That's why it's ovoviviparity, viva meaning the live birth there, right? But it is not the same as like a mammal, like the human being, that has a baby that has attached to its mother's circulatory system while it's in utero. So that's the difference there, okay? So some of this other stuff we actually covered in class today. So for you to get that information, I'm going to ask that you kind of go back to the recording and watch that. And what I would like to get into is, well, first of all, here's a summary kind of what we talked about in class. We have two types of fertilization, external and internal. External fertilization, of course, means fertilization is taking place outside of the mother's body, whereas internal fertilization means fertilization is taking place inside the mother's body. So that's done through copulation. Copulation can be in the form of like sexual intercourse, or there are some other types of copulation that are just kind of intriguing. For example, the giant squid has a special arm that the male squid deposits sperm in the arm and kind of like hands it off to the female to place it into the female opening. That's a different type of copulation, but it's still considered internal fertilization because the sperm is then placed inside the mother's body, and that's where fertilization takes place. Sorry about that. In both cases, the male gamete is the swimmer, and the female gamete, the egg, does not swim. In external fertilization, you're going to have a large number of female gametes released, lots of eggs. Increases the chance of fertilization, especially in like, for example, broadcast fertilization, where fish will just lay a ton of eggs, a big globule of eggs or whatever, and then the male fish will just ejaculate a whole bunch of sperm. And then it's just a matter of chance. The more eggs you have, the more likely that they will become fertilized. It's very likely even that within an entire group of eggs, you'll have multiple sperm. Well, obviously you'll have multiple sperm, but you'll have multiple fathers at that point as well. So again, an increase in genetic diversity. Moving on from there, let's talk a little bit about the timing of fertilization. It's very critical. There's a critical window in which fertilization can take place. This is mediated by a number of different things. In some cases, even external environmental cues will be what sets and kind of initiates that fertility cycle. You probably heard that some animals will experience periods during the season. We sometimes say they go into season, where the females are fertile and the males, are mating with the females. This oftentimes happens in the fall. And then you have, the mother being pregnant over the winter and the babies are born in the spring. And that happens fairly frequently. It's not like that with all animals, however. Birds are very different, right? Birds tend to go into season kind of in the latter part of the winter, early spring, and then they have their babies, again, late spring, early summer. They have shorter periods of gestation, so they don't have to have as much time, right, to be able to gestate their babies. Actually, they have eggs, of course, in which they incubate the babies. But pheromones or hormones also will play a huge role in the timing involved. One example of this is your own ovulatory cycle if you are a female. So during the course of a 28-day ovulatory cycle, menstrual cycle, there are a number of hormones that play a role in what's going on with your body. You have LH, which is called luteinizing hormone. And if you recognize the root word, that actually has to do with the moon, because we oftentimes, since these are monthly, they sometimes call these, your lunar cycles or your moon cycles. It's always been associated with that. You have FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone. We'll talk about that in a moment. And you have estrogen and progesterone. So when you're looking at where these hormones come into play, the early part of the cycle is primarily getting ready for ovulation. So the estrogen levels are going to be increasing, because what that's doing is that is actually going to be increasing and developing your uterine lining, the endometrial lining, so that's receptive for implantation. So it's inside the uterus. It's very thick and lush with blood and with tissue, so that if a fertilized egg comes into the uterus, it can attach itself and grow. You also have follicle stimulating hormone, which will kind of allow a little follicle to grow on your ovary, and then the egg inside the follicle will ripen. And then you've got luteinizing hormone, which is released right when ovulation takes place, and it causes that follicle to burst and the egg to burst forth and make its way down the fallopian tube. And then you'll notice that the estrogen levels kind of crash. The luteinizing hormone levels crash. Even the follicle-stimulating hormone levels kind of crash. But what increases is progesterone. You have very little at the beginning of the cycle, but progesterone increases in what is called the luteal period of your cycle. This is the ovulation period, or the beginning part of the cycle, and this is the luteal phase. Okay? This progesterone is necessary to maintain a pregnancy. So if you were pregnant, for example, this would not come back down but would stay high, and that would enable the baby that has implanted in the uterus to be able to grow until it produces a placenta, which will then maintain the pregnancy after the progesterone, goes back down. If there is no successful pregnancy, progesterone levels drop, and when they reach their minimum again, that is what causes menstruation to occur. So all of these hormones play a crucial role in fertility. It is during this time of the month here where those estrogen levels are at their peak and the luteinizing hormones are at their peak prior to and pretty much up to and a little after that you are the most fertile. Okay? That is when you are the most fertile during the month. All right, so when we look at survival of offspring, animals that produce very few offspring tend to be very much care for their offspring more. They provide more parental support. We call these K-type offspring. K-type organisms have larger offsprings, and they have to take a lot of energy, so they're not going to make very many babies, one or two, maybe a few. They have long periods of gestation, they have long life expectancies, and they have long periods of parental care. And so these animals tend to have longer lives, but there's fewer of them. Our type of animals tend to have smaller sized organisms, but they produce very, very many offspring because the chances of survival are low. Imagine the sea turtles, all the little baby sea turtles running off to the ocean, and only 10% of them make it. The other 90% are eaten before they get there. They have shorter life expectancies sometimes. Obviously, like sea turtles can live over 100 years. 150 and still young, dude, right? That was a really bad impression. I'm not going to go there. Our time's running short. All right, so that's the different types of organisms. We are obviously considered a K-type organism. Things like fish would be an R-type organism. Some of the changes that have occurred that enabled animals to become land-based. So we know that aquatic animals have eggs that do not have hard shells, and they also so the secretion of a hard shell around the egg allows the egg to withstand the harsher conditions of the terrestrial environment. That was one of the changes. The amniotic egg having a yolk sac to provide nutrients and kind of it provides like a little pond that substitutes for the water found in an aquatic environment. So when animals started laying their eggs on land, they still needed to have an aquatic environment for those animals to develop. And rather than having them floating in water, now they're floating in the, they're floating in this, albumin inside of the egg. And if you look at developments of vertebrate animals, we have the development of the egg here. The hard-shelled egg came right before these land-based animals really took off. It was really a prerequisite for that. Excuse me. And we can also see the separation here of when, you have these primitive mammals. This is, again, the egg way down below here. Now you have primitive mammals that are breaking off into our current day mammals, marsupials, and monotremes, which are egg-laying mammals. All right, so that's pretty much it today. If you have any questions, you can give me a call, and have a great day.